last week when we did the intro to oral interpretation day, then this is for you. Or if you're in that special fourth hour, then this is for you as well. So I want to look at this from the standpoint of oral interpretation, which is another way of saying acting, but without sort of like acting methodology. We're just going to look at the text and see if we can come up with a cool way of saying it. So here's the thing about this. If you are a normal person reading this in class, like you're in English class and you're supposed to read this section, it would sound something like this. Taran wanted to make a sword, but Call, charged with the practical side of his education, decided on horseshoes, and so did had been horseshoes all morning long. Right? So it's just sort of a boring way of saying it. But we have to remember that if you're an actor or speaker or singer, then your job is to get and then hold the audience's attention. And one way of doing that is to make sure that you're really helping them understand what's going on in this story by the way you say the words and the sentences. It's helping them get to the subtext. The text is the writing, the subtext is what you and the author want them to understand about what's going on in this scene. So I just want to take a look at a couple of things and just follow along, and then you can start to apply this. This sort of way of dealing with text is how you should do your lines for prose or poetry or one act. This year's one act because it's story theater. So it's a little more, it's less like emotionally real and more interesting to listen to. All right, so Taran wanted to make a sword. So Taran's a kid who wants to make a sword. We know that. Call, who is charged with the practical side of his education, meaning he's teaching him like the stuff to do to make a living or whatever. He's practical, not like theoretical education, decided on horseshoes. So you can imagine this. A kid has to make horseshoes when he wants to make a sword. I would rather make a sword, so would you. It's more fun. And so it had been horseshoes all morning long. I want to look at that line and see if we can say it in a way that indicates to the audience how Taran feels about that. So we did this in class already, and it would be better if I had just recorded that class so you could hear the class do this, but I'm going to do it for you. And then I'm going to do it twice. The first time I'm going to do it for you, and then honest to goodness, I want you to read along with me out loud when I do this for practice. If you're in that fourth hour group, just do this all together. I want this to sound like he's very bored. And so it had been horseshoes all morning long. So we elongate things because all morning long. It's very boring. He's been doing it repetitively, right? We say horseshoes in a way that indicates how he feels about horseshoes. So say it with me. 1, 2, 3, go. And so it had been horseshoes all morning long. All right, good. Next, Taran's arms ached. What does ached sound like? What the kids came up in class was, ugh, right? Like, ugh, if you're aching, if you're sore or whatever. So say ached with that sound, ugh, right? So Taran's arms ached. Do that with me. Taran's arms ached. So back up, and so it had been. And so it had been horseshoes all morning long. Taran's arms ached. Soot blackened his face. At last, he dropped. I want to say dropped so it sounds like something is dropping. So if I drop this pen so you can hear it, it's a very quick little, right? So I want to do it like dropped. At last, he dropped the hammer and turned to Call. All right? So at last, he dropped the hammer and turned to Call, who was watching him critically. I want to take a pause between him and critically. I want to know how Taran feels about him watching him critically, who was watching him critically, right? It could also be from Call's point of view, right? So pretend Call is sort of saying that in his head, who was watching him critically. All right, now we've got some lines to look at. Let's make Taran a little bit whiny. Why? Why must it be horseshoes? So you're going to take your voice up a little bit and elongate it and then just a little nasally and then make it like that. So say that with me. Why? Taran cried. Why must it be horseshoes? Then super sarcastic, as if we had any horses. Right? So now that we've read through that, we have a little more information to go back and look at it again. And I want to know, when you say Call for the first time, how Taran feels about Call. So Taran wanted to make a sword, But Call, charged with the practical side of his education, decided on horseshoes. And so what you have is a lot more information. So say this whole thing with me, read this whole thing. I know it's weird to do this outside of class, but you four boys in that one class can do it. If you're doing this at home because you missed it, do it with me. It's good practice. Taran wanted to make a sword, but Call, charged with the practical side of his education, decided on horseshoes. And so it had been horseshoes all morning long. Taran's arms ached. Soot blackened his face. At last he dropped the hammer and turned to Call, who was watching him critically. "Why?" Taran cried. "Why must it be horseshoes? As if we had any horses." So you see how that's way more interesting for the audience? And I know you're super goofy doing it when you're acting it, right? But that's the job, is to get to that subtext so that the audience knows exactly what those relationships are right from the beginning. All right, that's it. That is lesson 1 in oral interpretation. This, by the way, is from the Book of Three. We'll be looking at it a little more. Stop the video.